Money FM 89.3, best of weekends.
Joining us now, very happy to bring on the show Satu Limaye, the Vice President, Director of the East-West Center based in Washington, D.C. Satu, welcome. Great to have you on the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Delighted to be here. Good morning to you all.
So let's get your first blush. What's your first thought about where we're at in this crazy election cycle today?
Where we're at is no decision space, but heading towards a decision, I think, fairly soon. Maybe later tonight, maybe tomorrow. There is a question, as you have discussed this morning, about provisional ballots, going through the process of making sure all of them are counted, which is exactly what the institutions and the procedures and processes were designed for. So it's a great strength of our system. It may not be the prettiest, the kind of clearest immediately, but the job is getting done, and I think that's good for all of us, for the end process to have a very clear and careful process that we can all say, all right, we did an absolute good job here.
And Satu, ironically, this is actually a positive that we should celebrate that I think is being overlooked, because there was a very clear and easily to explain reason why this delay is so long. And unfortunately, it's the coronavirus pandemic. Voters were encouraged to get out early, vote early by post. The figures that I'm reading, up to 68%, and that's still rising, 68% of voters cast their ballots early compared to only 34% in 2016. I mean, that is a huge margin. And for lots of different reasons, those votes have to be checked very carefully. The process is slow, isn't it? They have to be taken out. The addresses have to be checked. They have to be smoothed out. They have to check.
Certified,
essentially. Then they have to be put in a scanner and so on and so on. So this is a positive, isn't it, Satu, that the post-in votes, the mail-in votes were necessary because of the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, some of the what I've been reading in Asia, speaking about relations between East and West, a little bit kind of disbelief, a certain amount of sort of a critical look at this process. But I must tell you, from an American point of view, I think this is a process that's giving its due care, and I think these are positive. The institutions are holding. State laws are being observed. Secretaries of state are on the hook with ballot counters. Republican and Democratic Party officials are there checking the ballots and certifying them before they get scanned. To my way of thinking, this, again, may not be the fastest process, but it suggests an extraordinarily close vote, a huge turnout, multiple avenues of voting to give everyone their say, and then on the back end, a careful certification process. So, it's not a perfect process, flawless process, but darn it, it gives me, at least as one American citizen, a real good feeling that it's getting done and every effort is being made to count every vote.
We're talking with Satu Limaye, who is the Vice President and Director of the East-West Center in Washington, D.C. And Satu, one of the things that has, I think, come to the fore in Gore versus Bush, and now 4 years ago, and now this election, is, as you just mentioned, the actual process of what happens in America. Now, everybody knew about the Electoral College. We've known about this for so many years and talked about it for many years. But the real difference, I think, this particular election is everyone is really seeing the absolute differences state by state as to how people can vote and how those votes are then counted and when. Is this a moment in time when perhaps there will be a wake-up call for some sort of standardization, even given the U.S. federalist system, some sort of standardization in the way people can vote in the future and when those votes should be tallied and how?
Well, Glenn, I've heard, first of all, I want to say I'm not an electoral expert on the American electoral system. I'm a citizen who watches this process.
Sure.
And obviously participates in this process. But I want to say a couple things. There's sort of two views. One view is that we need a standardized national policy where everyone votes the same way, same rules, same procedures. There's that kind of one spectrum of the argument. The other is the very strength of the system is these multiple avenues and multiple rules. It can't be hacked by one actor. It can't be undermined by one break point in the system. So that this is kind of a flexible strength of it. My hunch is, for those who are electoral specialists, and I repeat, I'm not, I'm kind of convinced by the argument. First of all, we're in a federal system, and states have rights to set these laws and set these terms. Sure. I mean, they can't violate against constitutional norms because it can be addressed up through the federal process all the way to the Supreme Court if you're writing laws that are discriminatory or anti-constitutional. But the notion that there are these different systems that are all abide by the Constitution, to my mind, does speak to a certain strength of the system. And there are compromises along the way as the United States has developed over 200 plus years, in which compromises have been made, electoral systems, to Senate. You can't just pull one thread and leave other threads untouched because you don't like the electoral system. This is part of a package of the development and evolution of the state and the system. And you can't just say, well, I don't like the way that this is done in X state, therefore we have to pull the thread on that. But then you're affecting other things, like there are states that split their electoral votes. Not all states do. So you have these cases where in Maine, current President Trump gets an electoral vote that's split. And so you're not going to be able to take those rights away under the federal system.
Yeah, and Satu, we're talking with Satu Limaye, the Vice President and Director of the East-West Center in Washington. And let's talk about something a little bit more contentious that brings East and West together. The racial component is something that Singaporeans have brought up to me all week long. I was actually talking to an American-born Chinese lady yesterday. And she was saying it's the race thing that I'm really grappling with at the moment, because record turnout, that should be celebrated. Whatever happens now, President candidate Joe Biden, has the most votes than any previous candidate in history. But the other point is that the incumbent still got 70 million votes. This is the issue. In an election, in a campaign that has been seen as very racially divisive, very antagonistic, and at times almost incendiary. So people I speak to in Singapore, the issue of race, he makes no secret of the fact that he uses race. It's very much a tool in his arsenal. How has he managed to increase that vote? And not just among white voters either. What's your view on that?
Well, first of all, we don't have all the data. So I'm going to have to add, we really need to think
based
through
on
this.
The 70 million votes he already has.
Right, on the data-driven vote. Well, first of all, it's not clear where that increase in Latin American vote and African American vote has increased for the president. We know that it happened in Dade County, but it's, again, very important for our friends in Asia to understand that you can't just flippantly ascribe racial categories or ethnic categories to people. People have multiple identities.
Yep.
Race, one, language, faith, where they live, family background, profession. I don't know which identity is most important for people. People have multiple identities. And so maybe in Dade County, a heavy Cuban-American Spanish-speaking element were moved by issues of ideology, socialism, notion of communism, conservatism, perhaps the Catholic faith. I don't know. African-American voters, yes, it is quite true that Mr. Trump increased, so the preliminary data suggests, Hispanic and African-American votes. But we also see that Georgia flipped, or could be close to flipping, which suggests that helped Mr. Biden quite a lot. And his numbers are very high on African-American support. So I don't want to over-racialize this issue. I was watching it as it happened earlier today, a Kristen Stewart film called Seberg about the actress in Breathless, who was active in the late 60s. And, it just reminded you that race is a recurrent thread and narrative in American history. And therefore, I wouldn't ascribe this election just to race, but a whole set of things that are at play. And the surprise about how many votes the president did get, despite the pandemic, despite economics, which suggests other things are going on. And we're going to have to carefully pull those threads and try to understand what is going on in our country, because we're all kind of thinking, what exactly is going on here?
It's a great point, Satu. It's one I made earlier, that we've got to be careful not to just write off America as some, all squeezed in together homogenous block. It's a far more complex issue. And it ties in nicely with a question we got from one of our viewers, Sylvia Koo. And again, it's slightly speculative, but what extent do you think religion has played in helping to sway voters one way or the other? Again, we don't have hard and fast data yet, so it's slightly speculative, just like race. But what role do you think, if any, religion might have played with voters?
Well, this is a very interesting question because, evangelicals have suggest vote will be important to gauge what happened, whether President Trump was able to retain that vote. It's also clear that, as you well know, Mr. Biden is of the Catholic faith, and therefore, in his life, it's been an important element. So faith runs through our system. Exactly what it did in keeping conservative Christian voters with the president. Some people may attribute this to the recent appointment of Justice Barrett to the Supreme Court, seen as a strong Catholic faith. So I just don't know yet. But again, like with race, I would suggest that faith is one identity, not necessarily the dominating or deciding identity when a person goes into the voting.
Talking with Satu Limaye, the Vice President Director of the East-West Center in Washington, D.C. Satu, the East-West Center does so many programs across the U.S. and Asia-Pacific for emerging leaders, both in the U.S., but more importantly in the Asia-Pacific region, the Indo-Pacific region. 65,000 alumni of the East-West Center scattered all over the world. When you look at coming programs from the East-West Center, perhaps either in Washington, D.C. for you or at the campus in Honolulu, what are they going to look like when it comes to governance and the way that this election might sway some of those future curriculum in those programs, if it will at all?
Well, again, as we go through this election, as we wait for a new administration, either a returning Trump or a new Biden administration, my sense is that the next president or administration will be less determinative of the programs we've run than the needs post-pandemic and the evolving international structure. So let me give you a concrete examples. And let me speak primarily to Washington because I run the Washington program, though I am vice president of the center as a whole. One, we're doing a whole bunch of programs on the Pacific Islands, on leadership, on training, on tourism officials. Now, much of those programs have to be done virtually in the pandemic era. So it's a platform change rather than a content change. The other thing we're looking at is there's much more emphasis on technology. So how do we deal with rising technology issues in the U.S.-Asia relationship, particularly in an environment where U.S. and China may be decoupling their relationship and the U.S. is seeking to protect high technology, for example, 5G, military applications, high-end semiconductors, et cetera. So there's a whole new set of issues coming online. And the center over 60 years has adapted over many phases of evolution of the international system. And I think we'll have to do that again. But the pace in which we will have to react and the platforms on which we will have to react are much faster. For example, we're starting a whole new set of programs in Washington on briefing the new congressional staff in the 117th Congress about the importance of Southeast Asia, about the importance of the Pacific Islands, because there's a churn, there's a staff turnover, people are coming and going, they're new members. So we're going to have to engage with them to say, hey, the East-West Center here is a resource, both for Americans and Asians and Americans together, to think through our common policies, to think through our common challenges and how we best can address them. But those are the kinds of programs we're looking at. And here we are on our 60th anniversary, and we really need to put a premium on flexibility and nuance and adaptability.
That's wonderful, Satu. And the next administration, whoever it might be, you've mentioned there, you'll talk to them about Southeast Asia, the role of Southeast Asia. I mean, just briefly, what sort of things will you be saying to them about the role that America should have with Southeast Asia moving forward?
Well, I can't help but flag one of the initiatives we launched in Singapore. We have a Singaporean partner at the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies. I'll just hold it up for you. America Matters for ASEAN. And in it, we document the national and subnational linkages between the countries of Southeast Asia and the United States. I mean, Vietnam is now the 6th largest contributor of foreign students to the United States. In the 25-year relationship that we've had, that we celebrated the anniversary this year, we have a remarkably growing partnership, including strategic and security issues. Thailand is a long-standing partner with which we share interests on the Mekong and the Mekong Basin regarding issues of development and riparian issues. We're expanding our relations with Indonesia. The defense minister of Indonesia was just in Washington for consultations. Singapore just extended for 15 years their defense arrangements with the United States, including a new Air Force squadron in Guam. So there are many avenues, defense, people-to-people ties, educational ties, cultural ties, civil society ties. We have a new project on mainland Southeast Asia that brings civil society organizations together. So all of these ways are in ways to keep our communities and our countries connected.
Satu, a fascinating conversation. Thanks for this this very 360 look at not only the elections, but how we can move forward in making sure that the lessons of this election can be put to good use. And like you say, the new Congress gets informed. Information and knowledge is so important. Thanks for your time today, Satu. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Good day to you all there.